Okay, well let's go now to Canada again. This time another region, and we'll talk with Alan. Hey, Alan, what have you got for us tonight?
Hey, Andrew. Yeah, I've called, or not called, never called before, but I've wanted to. I've written you a couple times. We had a little email exchange a couple weeks ago about
Okay.
trust and trusting.
Yeah.
But Andrew, am always so impressed by your focus on grace and on the positive and not getting sucked into all of the little bits and pieces that come with. So now that you have grace, and Paul goes on, and have, I just am curious how conscious of choice that is of yours. How important is that to remain just solely focused on grace, on what grace has given us. I'm completely convinced that if that's all I know, all my behavior, all my thoughts, all my motivation comes simply from the goodness of God's grace. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really that simple. And I mean, I see that in Paul and his writing. He always starts with, here's God's grace, and now that you have that, I mean, we could talk about anything, but it's all completely founded in grace. And I just want to hear how you kind of went through the pros and came to that place. And I mean, you're just so convinced of it. It's really,
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, well, I think you've nailed it. I mean, I've got a secret, and that is that there is no other message. And it's a crying shame that this is not plain and obvious. It's not really a secret. That's tongue in cheek. But I mean, in every church in America and every church around the world, we should be proclaiming God's grace every single Sunday and every single day. But here's the thing you run into. Oh, grace. Yeah, I already know about that. I'm saved. Thank you very much. Oh, grace. Yeah, that's for justification. Yeah, I already got that. I'm right with God by grace. Thanks very much. And they shut the book on grace, so to speak, and they move on as if there's something to move on to. Acts chapter 20, verse 24 says the gospel is the gospel of God's grace. And Paul says, I'm so amazed that you are deserting the gospel of grace, for another gospel, which is no gospel at all. So I just read at the opening of this broadcast, I read 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and it says that we've been qualified to minister one thing, and that is the grace of God. We've been qualified to minister the new covenant. I'm not qualified to minister 5 steps to a better marriage. I'm not qualified to minister 20 steps to a better life. I'm not qualified to minister some fake gospel about how you can be healthy and wealthy all the time. I'm not qualified to minister the 613 commands of Moses. And so, how did I get to this place? Well, Alan, I would just say it's the realization of what we're qualified to do. And far too many are acting as if they're qualified to tell you, look, imitate me and what I do. You should be doing what I'm doing. And let me tell you what to do. Here's what you got to do: volunteer for this, be more, do more, have a quiet time, get in an accountability group, join a small group, do this, do that. And we got all these things to do, and there's all these programs, and there's smoke on stage and a Harley coming up the center aisle, and we're entertaining people and all of that stuff. The problem is they don't walk away with the grace of God. You got thousands of Christians sitting in a church who are highly entertained, and they have no clue if they're totally forgiven or not. They're highly entertained, and yet they don't know they're the righteousness of God. They don't even know what that means. They're highly entertained, but they think they've fallen out of God's will and they got to get back in. They're highly entertained, but they think they got to pay 10% of their income in order to keep God liking them and blessing them. They're highly entertained, but they think they got to wake up and die to self every day. So they're trying to get rid of themselves when God says they're the new self. So the whole thing is hilarious and awful all at the same time. And what we've called Christianity in the world today is really, in a lot of cases, not every case, so there's obviously many exceptions, but what we've called Christianity is a self improvement program, a sin management system, and a country club for people to act conservative. And, we end up thinking, okay, gosh, I'm a conservative person. I've got family values. I've got conservative principles. I'm engaged in clean living. That must be what Christianity is. Yay, Jesus. Thank you for the principles. And in the meantime, we got all these jumping through hoops trying to self improve, get cleansed, get forgiven, get right. We're dimming the lights, playing sad music at the Lord's Supper, having everybody introspect. We're doing all this crazy stuff because we don't know the gospel. We don't know our forgiveness, and we don't know our freedom, and we don't know our identity. There is no other message. I wish there were 30 programs on this station that would proclaim nothing but the grace of God. And maybe there are. I haven't examined all the programs. But my point is, we Christians globally, we don't have another message. There's no other message that we are qualified to minister. This is it. So that's where I get my inspiration, my friend. It's from looking at every single letter of Paul, Peter, James, and John, and whether it's James saying, "Hey, if you're not a doer of the word, it's because you looked in the mirror and walked away and forgot your identity, forgot who you are," or if it's Paul saying, "Oh, you're not engaging in upright behavior. It's because you don't know that you died with Christ. You were crucified, buried, and raised with Him." Or Peter saying, "Oh, you're not exhibiting godly qualities." Well, that's because you've forgotten. You're short-sighted and blind, and you've forgotten your purification. You've forgotten your forgiveness. So then what's the answer? Remember your forgiveness. So then what should we talk about every day? Our forgiveness and our righteousness and our identity, because without that, we've got any religion in the world. Hey, everybody, please act better, would you? God wants you to act better. Well, duh. We've known that God's interested in upright living ever since we were at day one of our salvation. The problem is we haven't been able to get there. So, how do you get there? Well, Titus chapter 2 says the grace of God teaches us to live upright lives, and the grace of God teaches us to say no to sin. So that's the message. There is no other message. This is it. 2 Corinthians 3 says it's the only thing we're qualified to talk about. So it's high time the church should stop mixing law and grace, mixing the old covenant with the new covenant. We end up with some sort of concoction of our own invention and some sort of what we believe is a nice balanced compromise, and it just doesn't work. People say, "Oh, with this grace thing, you're just going to be sinning like crazy." And I say, "Well, you're sinning like crazy without God's grace, aren't you? Look at you. You think God's frustrated? You think God's angry? You think God's upset? You think you're quenching and grieving the Spirit all the time? You're falling out of His will? You're losing your salvation every Tuesday? And look at you. You're sinning just fine. You're sinning just fine under legalism because apart from the law, sin is dead." That's what Paul says. Apart from the law, under grace, sin is dead. And that's what I believe at the core of my being. There is no other message. So, Alan, I appreciate your encouragement tonight. Thanks for your question. So glad that you're connected with us. I know you emailed me before. Feel free to reach out anytime. I love talking with you.